My guest today is Christine Miles, who is an author, professional keynote speaker, consultant, executive coach, thought leader, entrepreneur, and a recognized world expert in the field of listening differently. Christine has helped thousands of executives, individuals, and families expand human connections, transforming businesses and lives. In today's episode, we talk about her best-selling book, What Is It Costing You Not to Listen? The Power of Understanding to Connect, Influence, Solve, and Sell. This book will encourage you to examine how you are listening to help solve most of life's problems. Welcome to Lifeology.
Oh, thank you so much, James.
I am looking forward to this. We had a fantastic talk in the pre-call, and that is what I love because all we do is just laugh. So I know during this conversation, we're going to laugh. We're going to teach each other so many things, or rather, you're going to teach my audience so many things about how to listen differently. So now, what is your backstory? What is it that got you into this field of listening?
Well, it really started very, very young for me. I was as early as 5. I can remember I needed to learn to listen differently. This will go right into your background as well. I grew up with a mom who had psychological issues. So I thought I was going to change the world by becoming a therapist, which I did early. But my job and responsibility was to really listen to her pain that was underneath the surface that people didn't see. She had lost her mother from being born. And she was very charismatic and warm and loving and open, pain underneath the surface. So she didn't have a mother. So the girl and she saw in me wanted some of that understanding. So there was burden in that, of course, but there was also ultimately a lot of gift. Yeah.
And that's the thing. That's everything we're given. There's a blessing and a burden, and so it depends on what side of the coin you want to look at. And so the more awareness you have of that, what feels like a burden, if you just kind of switch your perspective and say, well, if it's not a burden, how could it be slightly different? And if it's slightly different, then that starts the journey of how to take what was once a burden and turn it into a gift, just like you did.
Yeah, and it is a gift. And I learned probably as early as high school that I was starting to overachieve relative to any actual ability I had, because I had this ability to listen differently. It was turbocharging very average abilities into something that was standing out, whether that was on the athletic field or how I made relationships. So that's pretty much why I've made this my life's work, is because I see the power of what it can do for others as it's done for me.
Wow, that's amazing. When you say just listen differently, can you quantify that for us or just explain what that means? Because everyone's having different connotation. Well, once again, it's going to explain how you listen differently. What does that mean?
Yeah, so listening differently means that we learn to listen to really understand, not just to hear or to perceive, but really to understand and to hear what isn't said. So unfortunately, listening is treated like walking. You have legs, so you'll learn to walk or figure it out eventually. You have ears, so you'll learn to listen. And it's such an assumed skill. It just doesn't work that way. So we have a lot of mixed messages about, hey, we're told to listen, but we're not told how. And then what is listening? And most people aren't taught that listening is really to find the meaning and the message and the person, not just, what they are perceiving on the surface.
Yeah. How do you help people look at their listening style? I mean, because there's different styles, but what's ways in which you can help people be active right now as far as, active listening, the difference of active listening versus passive listening. So perhaps tell us what that means, and then we'll look at the different styles that people have and quick ways in which they can quickly up their skills.
Well, first, one of the things I just want to take a step back because the solution's so important. But again, I've learned that we don't even have language. Now you do, because you've been listening your whole life and in your career. But most people don't have a lot of language around listening because, again, it's all assumed and it's told. So this notion of attentive listening, I think, is what's been on the landscape for a long time. And we ask people, is listening important? Everybody says yes. What have they done about it, learned about it? Very little. 2% of people have had any sort of listening training. So right there is a huge gap because they don't know how. And part of it is that we're taught these behaviors to show that we should attend to the listener, which is like eye contact and be present, don't be on your phone. To me, these are very surface level things that don't get us very far. And the brain is such an enemy of listening that we're stuck in the paradigm of white knuckling it rather than really having the tools that we need to calm the brain down to do it differently.
Yeah. Exactly. And I like the fact that you talk about the superficial aspects of listening because, you know, it's literally there's so much going on. So here in my house, I have my lights on, everything's going on. My dog behind me is making snoring here. You can't hear him, but I can hear him. So all that stuff is happening right now. And so I'm like, okay, so, but to really be able to focus in and say, no, what is Christine really saying? And so, and what's the meat of it? My dad always taught me that we judge others by their behaviors, but we judge ourselves by our intentions. And so when we look at the behaviors or the communication style that someone has, and then I judge that based on my intent, sometimes there's a disconnect. And so I can get triggered by something because I hear them use a word that is a strong word for me. And all of a sudden I'm like, wow. And then I just react and someone's like, whoa, where did that come from? So there's a difference between that. So, it is important, in my opinion, I mean, you're the expert here, is to really focus on that. If my intent is to listen, and you can even flip it around. What's their intent when they're talking? And what's my behavior as I'm listening? And so I think that's a way to kind of be mindful of that. But, that's something you are the expert on with that.
Well, first of all, I applaud your father that he gave you that advice at such an early age, because it's so key, because it's the story we tell ourselves. Right. It's really, that's the other enemy of listening, is our subconscious brain. It's the superpower. And so it's telling us to do everything but listen. So you just described the external environment, which is now the phone, which is one thing, the phone, the computer in our hands all the time, the dog snoring, the noise outside. Then there's this noise in our brain that is, what story am I telling myself? Does this person care? Or what is their intent? Have I even considered their intent? It's also, am I trying to mind read? Am I trying to anticipate what you say? Am I stuck in problem solving? All these are the enemy of really listening to understand. And that's why you need the tools. So we can certainly talk about that as well. But I want to make the listeners aware that it's not their fault they don't know how to listen. And it is costing us dearly because we're not taught how, but we're really not equipped to listen differently.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Let's jump into your book and then we'll talk about some of the techniques. So the book, once again, is What Does It Cost You Not to Listen? The Power of Understanding to Connect, Influence, Solve, and Sell. I'm assuming this book is for everybody because we all have to learn how to listen. Is that correct? So it can be from housewives, full-time job. It could be from the students. It could be from someone in the C-suite. It can be whatever it is. I mean, that's something where we have to learn. So I'm assuming everybody can relate with this.
Yeah, this is a human skill, as you just pointed out. And one of the great things about the business that I'm in, while we largely serve organizations, we also impact relationships, that we can't separate our personal selves from our business selves. And so sometimes people first take it into their personal relationships and have profound results, and then they're more willing to try it in a business conversation. We're basically always trying to uncover what the real need is if we want to be successful. If we're calling on customers, we need to figure that out. If we are talking to our spouse, we should figure that out. And certainly if we're talking to our children, we should figure that out. So it's a business and relationship book because they go hand in hand.
Yeah, that's perfect. One thing I always like to look at, and I'm sure your book talks about this as well, is to understand what is my role as a listener. So if a friend comes to talk to me and they're telling me everything, if I immediately go into problem solving and they don't want me to problem solve, well, then they're like, well, wait a minute, I just stop. And so all of a sudden I've created a disconnect between myself and this other person. So, I'm assuming, obviously you talk about this as well, is the different roles we play as a listener. Am I just a shoulder to cry on? Am I, just a big ear to listen? Am I someone, whatever it is, whatever that role is. But once that's defined in my life or defined in that role, then I can be successful in that. And I'm able to meet whatever the need that is because I know the role I'm supposed to play.
Yeah, I think it's really hard for people not to problem solve. And I always say that's such a good problem to have. Like, you see someone in pain and trouble, they're coming to tell you about that. You're not acting ill-willed if you're trying to help them solve something that looks obvious in terms of the solution. I learned this when I was a therapist. Sometimes people would ask me to tell them what to do. And guess what? I start to tell them they weren't anxious to listen because they weren't ready. So to me, the role of listening, exactly. The role of listening is really always to help the other person, for you to earn the right to be whatever you need for that other person. And sometimes that earns you the right to solve the problem or to help them. And that's really a powerful gift when you can give that. But people need to feel understood before they're going to take any kind of, let's do this. So how do you do that in a way that, and either way, the teller feels better because you really understood them And when you understand somebody, you give them a gift.
That's true. That really is. When we remove the superficial aspect of listening, what are some more profound techniques that people can use? So right now they can activate this and they can assimilate it rather and practice it, do it. And obviously they're going to purchase your book, but what are some ways in which they can learn right now?
So the first thing is that we have to forget everything we know, because that's the white knuckling. So that may sound simple. It's like, oh, I'm just supposed to listen. We retain 17 to 25% of what we hear. The brain's too powerful. So let's just start over. Let's do that. But there's some really simple things, and they may seem almost too simple, but they're pretty profound. And I think, one of the things is that you're the guide, and how you guide the teller, the person talking, is really to know that you have to get the underneath stuff, and how to do that in a very powerful way is a simple question. Questions that journalists use, questions that therapists use. One of those questions is, hey, how does that make you feel? Just asking about feelings rather than facts, and I'm talking business or personally, opens up an entirely different conversation. Now, we're not socialized, as you might know, to ask about feelings, because we think, is that an invasion? Is that personal? Or maybe we're not taught to even pay attention. But when we ask that fundamental question, the connection between the teller and the listener becomes profoundly different, and the real understanding and empathy starts to come into the conversation.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So that's one. Another question.
And then that's a really good point.
Yeah, so important, because again, and this is interesting because we talk in business about this all the time, calling on C-level executives. Well, I would never ask them that question. And I'm like, have you ever talked to a C-level executive about how personal business is? I mean, they have the lives of many employees on their shoulders. They have, a lot of stress. They have a lot of things. They say it's lonely at the top for a reason, right? So to think that we shouldn't be tapping into the feelings in those conversations is kind of just really, again, we have to forget what we know. That's too personal. It's really not. It's really the point. And then part of that is then being willing to go deeper and explore more. So we tend to respond with saying something profound or asking this powerful question. Sometimes it's as simple as just saying, tell me more. How about you just tell me more and let the person open up, right?
Yes. Yeah. So Maya Angelou, of course, we know the amazing Maya Angelou. I'm totally going to butcher it. But she said, people will always remember how you made them feel, not necessarily what you said or what you did. Totally butchered it. Sorry, my Angelou fans, but I got the gist of that. But the point is that's true, because you're talking about the feelings of that. So if I ask how are you feeling about that, all of a sudden people will remember that. That becomes an emotional connection that we now have, and that takes it from a superficial connection to a more in-depth, profound connection. And people remember that, and people are more prone to want to work with someone or get to know someone in business and personal lives, whatever it might be, because you're like, oh, this person connected with me on a personal level, and that felt good. So our subconscious will remember that felt good, and so therefore they want to connect with you more.
Yeah, there's an implied sense of caring when you ask me about how I feel. And by the way, most people don't notice. It's not a conscious thing where they're going to be like, wow, Christine asked me how I felt. It's more like, she asked me, I answered, I felt good. I didn't know I felt good. Oh, she cares. All this is an unconscious process that happens, that connects you, but makes you as the listener memorable. And by the way, also helps you get to the root of things. So when you get to the root of things, we can get things done faster. I mean, I appreciated that you talked about Maya Angelou. That quote is in the book, by the way. But also, you look at it. There you go. You look at Chris Voss, who was an FBI negotiator. He says, you want to get something done, become an expert in empathy. The problem is, how do we learn to empathize? We don't all have the same level of empathy. It doesn't mean we don't care. We just don't, we're not used and socialized to feelings. So that makes our empathy lower. And when we ask about the feelings, it automatically gets raised. So I think we have it backwards. We expect people to be empathetic instead of giving them the way to be empathetic.
And I know sometimes when people will say, well, how are you feeling about that? Let's say if I ask someone that and I don't have the ability or feel like I don't have the ability to sit with someone's emotions, then that's something that has to be practiced as well. Because as the listener, I can ask that question, but I don't have to fix it. I can hear what they say.
That's right.
And I probably felt that before. So if they're like, oh, that doesn't feel very good, or I feel really sad about that. Well, I know what it feels like to be sad. I don't have to fix the problem, but I can relate. I know what it feels like to be sad. So if people aren't used to hearing emotions or sitting with emotions, other people's emotions, it's good to be aware that you don't have to fix it, but you know what it feels like because you've been there before. And that's an easy bridge to be able to talk more about that, because you can be relatable. Oh, I know how that feels too. I remember when I felt really sad about that. Boom, that's an easy connection, an easy bridge to be able to both process, or not process, but to, talk about your own struggles.
I think you're really onto something, and again, we talk about that. I talk about that in the book as well, because there is a fear. Like it's dark down there sometimes. Pain it's hard to bear witness to people's pain. One of my therapists over the years told me that's the gift you give to others very often, is just simply to bear witness. That is a fix in and of itself. And when you're willing to bear witness, you're doing something profound for the person that you're with.
Yeah.
And so, but that's why I say forget what you know, because the idea is I'm uncomfortable, you're uncomfortable, I should fix it, rather than this is the fix, this is enough to bear witness. And then if you're armed with the right tool, rather than what do I say or how do I respond, and you just simply say, tell me more, your brain doesn't have to work, and the other person can keep going.
Yeah. And then once you build that endurance, then it's easier to do it. So the more, like you said, when you build that empathy and start having those conversations, you can go from like today, on a scale of 1 to 10, today, maybe I'm at a level 2 when it comes to my empathy.
That's
but
right.
Maybe tomorrow, since I practiced a lot, I'm now at a 3 and now at a 4, and it just raises in really, really quickly. And so that's self-development. And that's just learning how to sit with your emotions, sit with the ability just to ask people questions. And so when we're more external like that and more engaging, interpersonal, that's where, like you said, most of life's problems can be solved quickly like that.
Well, one of the things that I was committed to doing in this book, and have been committed with our business, is to make this simple, because it's so complicated. And what I realized, I used to think I had some weird kind of gift because I had this thing that I could pay attention to things that weren't said. What I realized is that I also learned from my father, who was an amazing listener. He's 89 now. But so I've been doing this kind of in a skill building way. I just had to kind of reverse engineer it, but it's not easy. The simple part is the system, the framework. The hard part is practicing it and doing it. Like you said, you've got to build the muscle, and it's not just an automatic. So that's the harder part. The good news is there's an inordinate amount of practice out there, because you can listen to the Uber driver, the person at the grocery checkout, your children, your colleagues, strangers. When you have these mini interactions where you listen on a level that others don't, you start to show up in the world in a different way. And there's just a new life that comes into both yourself and the relationships that you have.
And it's super exciting too, because when you can really listen to people, like you said, you show up differently, and all of a sudden it's like a superpower, because everyone's like, oh my gosh, James, how are you? Because I made them feel a certain way. And so all of a sudden doors open, and of course we don't do it for manipulation, but it's just more people are drawn to you. It's a level of charisma that many people don't tap into, because like you said, they don't know how to listen. And so once they do learn this, it literally is like everyone doors open nonstop, and because you enjoy listening, you want to hear, and people want to be around you.
It's I call it the gift of understanding. When you give that, you get more than you actually ever thought was possible, because you're giving, you get that back. Again, it's not that it's said. I tell a story in the book about I was doing events around the country in 2019 before the pandemic. And one of the event coordinators came up to me and said, Christine, what's it like for everybody to like you? And I started laughing, and I said, trust me, it's not me. They like, as you said, how I'm making them feel when I listen, because I'm spending time listening to them, even for 10 minutes. And there's a connection, and that's what she was witnessing. So it's, and just to add to another tool, because I think the practice and the fear of the emotion sometimes can be part of it, is that, and by the way, this will also get to the story faster. So, if you want to really uncover what's happening and you don't have patience for listening, you ask these kinds of questions, you'll get the story faster. But the other thing that's really important to do is to affirm what you heard and really just reflect it in 30 to 90 seconds. And this is the biggest thing we miss in listening. I said it, you heard it, we came to an understanding. And in reality, that's not at all what happened, because of all the things that interfere. So if we just simply said, let me see, James, if I get you, and I reflect what I heard, both the facts and the feelings, and then ask you to affirm that, do I get you? And you go yes or no, then we're bonding in a different way in the conversation as well. So that's another tool that really changes how we listen.
Yeah, definitely. Because that's funny, but we do that and as you know, in marriage counseling as well, because that's one of the most difficult things when it comes to marriage counseling, or just is this, conversations that just people don't hear the same thing.
Right.
We're kind of reflecting off of that as well, is that mirroring aspect, or that the validation part. That is something I think that most people don't get. So even if I were to say, I'm struggling here, and then you hear that, but sometimes just being able to say, gosh, that sounds like that really hurts your feelings, or that really hurt you. Just as simple like that as well, I think it validates and affirms what you said. So it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't have to be anything profound, but when you can validate what they're giving you and saying that must be so painful, that in itself is probably all you have to say, because you validated what they're feeling in such a powerful, visceral way. Yeah. And there's so many techniques you're teaching here that there's so many. And the funny thing is like you said, it's not difficult, but it's more, just slow down and be aware. What am I doing? How am I showing up in this conversation right now? One thing and we'll be closing out in just a minute, but one thing I think many people do is, especially if you're really, really energetic, like I'm really energetic right now, is if I'm thinking, well, what am I going to say right now? She says it, whatever she says, I'm going to say something. And I'm already on the other side of your statement, as opposed to joining with your statement and moving with it, because what I might say may not be applicable. And so it's learning how to really actively listen, and to listen to the words, even have a pause. Oh, well, that's really cool. Okay. And then I can move on. But I think so many times people jump the gun, and that's where they can miss it so much. I mean, once again, you're the expert here.
Well, no, you're right on it. This is where the brain is so powerful, though. If we don't give it a sedative, we're not going to be able to overcome that. And so we need tools, which is what's absent. We're just expected, like if you told me to run a 5-minute mile, it's not going to happen. You're going to have to train me and give me the techniques to get there. So it's the same thing. And just those 2 questions I share allow the subconscious brain, where there's 6 of these questions, just those 2 alone will help slow you down, because now we're not thinking about how do I respond. We're thinking about what do I ask more of, without having to really think a lot about it. Yeah. So the brain, overcoming that is really, that's why it takes practice, but the tools will do the calming. That's what we've built in. And how do you marry them together to really let the empathy and the insight come to you, rather than you having to find it? I think we've had that backwards as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like how you say that in the sense of, it's when you slow down and allow these 6 questions that you ask, that really gives you the ability to not have to worry about what do I say? It's just simply activation of that allows you to just think in a different way. If I always like to talk about like a Rubik's Cube, or a cube in general. Sometimes we have certain techniques we use all the time when we talk, but if you take that cube and turn it a little bit, and turn it whatever side, they're 6 different sides, maybe like 6 different questions. Oh, that was good. 6 different questions. And so you can ask these different questions to allow you to say, well, if I ask this question, or this question, or this question, and all of a sudden you have this whole different way in which you interact and show up in the world. And that allows you to say, wow, that was so much easier. I don't have to fix everybody. I can just allow myself to just sit with this. And sometimes silence speaks more volumes than the 1,000 words we could say.
It does. Well said. Very well said.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Well, unfortunately, our time is up, Christine. If my listeners want to find out more information about you and to purchase this book, What Is It Costing You Not to Listen? The Power of Understanding to Connect, Influence, Solve, and Sell. Where will they find this information online?
Well, you can buy the book at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, those usual places, or find us at whatisitcostingyounottolisten.com.
Excellent. Well, Christine Miles, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on my show today. My listeners know that if they cannot find this information any other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com, and I will link you with all of Christine's information. Thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on my show today. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.